viewers, and welcome to another chapter of reading. As you can tell, this is another camping chapter, so let's get started, shall we? Chapter 8, The Hearing. Harry gasped. He could not help himself. The large dungeon he had entered was horribly familiar. He had not only seen it before, he had been here before. This was the place he had visited inside Dumbledore's pensive. The place he had watched the Lestranges sentenced to life imprisonment in Azkaban. The walls were made of dark stone, dimly lit by torches. Empty benches rose on either side of him, but ahead, in the highest benches of all, were many shadowy figures. They had been talking in low voices, but as the heavy door swung closed behind Harry, an ominous silence fell. A cold male voice ran across the courtroom. "You're late." "Sorry," said Harry nervously. I didn't know the time had changed." "That is not the Wisdom and God's fault," said the voice. "An owl was sent to you this morning. Take your seat." Harry dropped his gaze to the chair in the center of the room, the arms of which were covered in chains. He had seen those chains spring to life and bind whoever sat between them. His footsteps echoed loudly as he walked across the stone floor. When he sat gingerly on the edge of the chair, the chains clinked rather threateningly, but did not bind him. Feeling rather sick, he looked up at the people seated at the bench above. There were about 50 of them. Oof. I would consider that a crowd, and crowds aren't my best friend. Like, literally. So I don't blame Harry for getting nervous at all. As far as he could see, wearing plum-covered robes with an elaborately worked silver W on the left-hand side of the chest, and all staring down their noses at him, some with very austere expressions, others looks of frank curiosity. Well, I'm wearing purple. However, it's not a dark purple, so I would consider this more of a pale violet. Moving forth. In the very middle of the front row sat Cornelius Fudge, the Minister of Magic. Fudge was a portly man who often sported a lime green bowler hat. No. I'll stick to my pale violet dress. Bowler hat, though today he had dispensed with it. He had dispensed, too, with the indulgent smile he had once worn when he spoke to Harry. A broad, square jaw, which with very short gray hair, sat on Fudge's left. She wore a monocle and looked forbidding. On Fudge's right was another witch. She was sitting so far back on the bench that her face was in shadow. "Very well," said Fudge, the accused being present. Finally, "let us begin. Are you ready?" he called down the row. "Yes, sir," said an eager voice Harry knew. Ron's brother Percy was sitting at the very end of the front bench. Harry looked at Percy, expecting some sign of recognition from him, but none came. Percy's eyes, behind his horn-rimmed glasses, were fixed on his parchment, a quill poised in his hand. in the plenary hearing on the 12th of August. Well, it's not the 12th, but it is August today. So, happy 1st of August, said Fudge in a ringing voice, and Percy began taking notes at once. Into offences committed under the decree for the reasonable restriction of underage sorcery and the international statute received by Harry James Potter, resident at number 4, Pivot Drive, Nidwingen, Surrey. Interrogators Cornelius Oswald Fudge. Oswald. That's funny. Minister of Magic Amelia Susan Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Dolores Jane Umbridge, Senior Undersecretary to the Minister. She's quite the character, let me tell you. Don't worry, you'll learn more about her as we progress. Court Scribe Percy Ignatius Weasley. Witness for the defense Albus Percival Wolfgang Brian Dumbledore, said a quiet voice from behind Harry, who turned his head so fast he cricked his neck. Dumbledore was striding serenely across the room wearing one midnight blue robe and a perfectly calm expression. Ooh, midnight blue is my favorite shade of blue. It is so pretty. His long silver beard and hair gleamed in the torchlight as he drew level with Harry and looked up at Fudge through the half-moon spectacles that rested halfway down his very crooked nose. The members of the Wizengamot were muttering. All eyes were now on Dumbledore. Some looked annoyed, others slightly frightened. Two elderly witches in the back row, however, raised their hands and waved in welcome. I would be one of the ones that waved to Dumbledore, too. So, here. A powerful emotion had risen in Harry's chest at the sight of Dumbledore. A fortified, hopeful feeling, rather like that of which Phoenix song gave him. He wanted to catch Dumbledore's eye, but Dumbledore was not looking his way. He was continuing to look up at the obviously flustered Fudge. Out of context, it makes one wonder how Fudge gets flustered. But they do love the alliteration there. Oh, said Fudge, who looked thoroughly disconcerted. Dumbledore, yes, you got out. Message. Oh, I'm gonna restart this a little. You got message that the time and place of the hearing had been changed then. I must have missed it, said Dumbledore cheerfully. However, due to a lucky mistake, I arrived at the Ministry 3 hours early, so no harm done. Yes. I suppose we'll need another chair. Weasley, could you... Not to worry, said Dumbledore pleasantly. He took out his wand, gave it a little flick, and the squashy Chin's-arm chair appeared out of nowhere next to Harry. Dumbledore sat down, put the tips of his long fingers together, and looked at Fudge over them with an expression of polite interest. The Wizard and Got were still muttering and fidgeting restlessly. Only when Fudge spoke again did they settle down. Yes, said Fudge again, shuffling his nose. Well then, so the charge, yes. He extracted a piece of parchment from the pile before him, took a deep breath, and read, "The charges against the accused are as follows: that he knowingly, deliberately, and in full awareness of the illegality of his actions, having received a previous written warning from the Ministry of Magic on a similar charge, produced a Patronus charm in a Muggle-inhabited area, in the presence of a Muggle, on August the 2nd, at 23 minutes past 9, which constitutes an offence under paragraph C of the decree of for the reasonable restriction of underage sorcery, 1875, and also under section 13 of the International Confederation of Wizards Statute of Secrecy." Well, we're not in the 2nd of August quite yet, but again, we did start August, so happy August. Meanwhile, Harry James Potter of number 4, Pivot Drive, Middlewing, Surrey, Bud said, glaring at Harry over the top of his parchment. "Yes," Harry said. "You received an official warning from the Ministry for using illegal magic 3 years ago, did you not?" "Yes, but—" "And yet you conjured a Patronus on the night of the 2nd of August?" said Bud. "Yes," said Harry, "but—" "Knowing that you are not permitted to use magic outside of school while you are under the age of 17. "Yes, but—" "Knowing that you are in an area full of Muggles. "Yes, but—" "Fully aware that you were in close proximity to a Muggle at the time." "Yes," said Harry angrily, "but I only used it because we were—" The witch with the monocle on Fudge's left cut across him in a booming voice. "You've produced a fully fledged Patronus?" "Yes," said Harry, "because a corporal Patronus—" "What?" said Harry. "Your Patronus had a clearly defined form. I mean to say, it was more than vapor or smoke." "Yes," said Harry, feeling both impatient and slightly desperate. "I would too." "It's a stag. It's always a stag." "Always?" boomed Madam Bones. "You have produced a Patronus before now?" "Yes," said Harry. "I've been doing it for over a year." "And you are 15 years old?" "Yes, and—" "You learned this at school?" "Yes. Professor Lupin taught me in my 3rd year because of the—" "Impressive," said Madam Bones, staring down at him. "A true Patronus at that age. Very impressive indeed." Some of the wizards and witches around her were muttering again. A few nodded, but others were frowning and shaking their hands. Heads. Sorry. "It's not a question of how impressive the magic was," said Fudge in a testy voice. "In fact, the more impressive, the more it is. I would have thought, given that the boy did it in plain view of a Muggle." Those who had been frowning now murmured in agreement, but it was the sight of Percy's sanctimonious little nod that goaded Harry into speech. did it because of the Dementors, he said loudly before anyone could interrupt him again. He had expected more muttering, but the silence that fell seemed to be somehow denser than before. Dementors, said Madame Bones for a moment, raising her thick eyebrows so that her monocle looked in danger of falling out. What do you mean, boy? I mean there were 2 Dementors down that alleyway, and they went for my cousin and I. Ah, said Fudge again, smirking unpleasantly as he looked around at the Winsman God, as though inviting him to share the joke. Yes, we thought we were hearing something like this. Dementors and Little Winging, said Madame Bone said in tones of great surprise. I don't understand. Don't you, Amelia? Said Fudge, still smirking. Let me explain. He's been thinking through and decided Dementors would make a nice little cover story. Very nice indeed. Muggles can't see Dementors, can they, boy? Highly convenient. Highly convenient. So it's just your word and no witnesses. I'm not lying, said Harry loudly. Oh, for another outbreak of muttering from the court. There were 2 of them. Oh, yeah. There were 2 of them, coming from opposite ends of the alley. Everything went dark and cold. My cousin felt them and ran for it. Enough, said Fudge with a very supercilious look on his face. I'm sorry to interrupt what would have been a very well-rehearsed story. Okay, if Veritaserum exists, why can't you have the people take it before the trial? That way you know they're telling the truth. I just feel like that would be a little fun equivalent to the Muggles. Do you promise to swear that you'll tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I just think that would be fitting with circumstances like this. And future circumstances. You know? Moving on. Dumbledore cleared his throat. The Winsman fell silent again. We do in fact have a witness to the presence of the Dementors in that alleyway, he said. Other than Dudley Dursley, I mean. Fudge's plump face seemed to slacken, as though somebody had let air out of it. He stared down at Dumbledore for a moment or 2. Then, with the appearance of a man pulling himself back together, said, We haven't got time to listen to more tattadiddles, I'm afraid, Dumbledore. I want this dealt with quickly. I may be wrong, said Dumbledore pleasantly, but I am sure that under the Wizeningod Charter of Rights, the accused has the right to present witnesses for his or her case. Isn't that the policy of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, Madame Bones? He continued, addressing the witch in the monocle. True, said Madame Bones. Perfectly true. Oh, very well, snapped Fudge. Where is this person? I brought her with me, said Dumbledore. She's just outside the door. Should I? No. Weasley, you go. Fudge barked at Percy, who got up at once, hurried down the stone steps from the judge's balcony, and hastened past Dumbledore and Harry without glancing at them. A moment later, Percy returned, followed by Mrs. Big. She looked more scared and more batty than ever. Harry wished she had thought to change out one of her carpet slippers. Yeah, I don't think slippers are appropriate for a Wizeningod hearing. Dumbledore stood up and gave Mrs. Big his chair. pondering the second one for himself. "Full name?" said Budge Wellby when Mrs. Fig had perched herself nervously on the very edge of her seat. "Arabella Doreen Fig," said Mrs. Fig in her quavery voice. And I love how that flows. It's so beautiful. "And who exactly are you?" said Budge in a bored and lofty voice. "I'm a resident of Nittlebingley, close to where Harry Potter lives," said Mrs. Fig. "We have no record of any witch or wizard living in Nittlebingley other than Harry Potter," said Madam Bones at once. "That situation has always been closely monitored given past events." "I'm a squib," said Mrs. Fig. "So you wouldn't have me registered, would you?" "A squib, eh?" said Budge, eyeing her suspiciously. "We'll be checking that. You'll have details of your parentage with my assistant, Weasley. Incidentally, can squibs see Dementors?" he added, looking left and right along the fence where he sat. "Yes, we can," said Mrs. Fig indignantly. Budge looked back down at her, his eyebrows raised. "Very well," he said coolly. What is your story?" "I had gone out to buy cat food from the corner shop at the end of Wisteria Walk, shortly after 9 on the evening of the 2nd of August," gabbled Mrs. Fig at once, as though she had learned what she was saying by heart, "when I heard a disturbance down the alleyway between Magnolia Crescent and Wisteria Walk. On approaching the mouth of the alleyway, I saw Dementors running," said Madam Bones sharply. "Dementors don't run, they glide." "That's what I meant to say," said Mrs. Fig quickly, patches of pink appearing in her withered cheeks, "gliding along the alley toward what looked like 2 boys." "What did they look like?" said Madam Bones, narrowing her eyes so that the monocle's edges disappeared in her flesh. "Well, one was very large and the other one rather skinny." "No, no," said Madam Bones impatiently. "The Dementors. Describe them." "Well, to be fair, you didn't specify what you want to know what this looks like. So you could have been a little more clear." "Oh," said Mrs. Fig, pink flush creeping up on her neck now. "They were big and wearing cloaks." Harry felt a horrible sinking in the pit of his stomach. Whatever Mrs. Fig said to the contrary, it sounded to him as though most she had ever seen was a picture of a Dementor, and a picture could never convey the truth of what these veins were like. The eerie way they moved, the hovering inches above ground, or the rotting smell of them, or that terrible rattling noise they made as they sucked on the surrounding air. The dumpy wizard with the large black mustache and the second one leaned closer to his neighbor, a frizzy-haired witch, and whispered something in her ear. She smirked and nodded. "Big and wearing cloaks," repeated Madame Bones coolly, while Fudge snorted derisively. "I see. Anything else?" "Yes," said Mrs. Fig. "I felt them. Everything went cold. And this was a very warm summer's night, mark you. And I felt as though all the happiness had gone from the world. And I remembered dreadful things." Her voice shook and died. Madame Bones's eyes widened slightly. Harry could see red marks under her eyebrow where the monocle had dug into it. What did the Dementors do? She asked, and Harry felt a rush of hope. They went for the boys, said Mrs. Fig, her voice stronger and more confident now, the pink flush ebbing away from her face. One of them had fallen. The other was backing away, trying to repel the Dementor. That was Harry. He tried twice and produced silver vapor. On the third attempt, he produced a Patronus, which charged down the first Dementor, and then, with his encouragement, chased away the second from his cousin. And that was what happened, said Mrs. Fig, finished somewhat lamely. Madam Bones looked down at Mrs. Fig in silence. Fudge was not looking at her at all, but fidgeting with his papers. Finally, he raised his eyes and said rather aggressively, That's what you saw, is it? That was what happened, Mrs. Fig repeated. Very well, said Fudge. You may go. Mrs. Fig cast a frightened look from Fudge to Dumbledore, then got up and shuffled toward the door again. Harry heard it then shut behind her. Not a very convincing witness, said Fudge loftily. Oh, I don't know, said Madam Bones in her booming voice. She certainly described the effects of a Dementor attack very accurately, and I can't imagine why she would say they were there if they weren't. But Dementors wandering into a Muggle suburb and just happening to come across a wizard, snorted Fudge. The odds on that must be very, very low. Even Bagman wouldn't have her. But I don't think any of us believed the Dementors were there by coincidence, said Dumbledore lightly. The witch sitting next to Fudge with her face in shadow moved slightly, but everyone else was still quite still and silent. And what is that supposed to mean? Said Fudge icily. It means I think they were ordered there, said Dumbledore. I think we might have a record of it if someone had ordered a pair of Dementors to go strolling through Niddlewinging. Oh, wrong place. Sorry. I think we might have a record of it if someone had ordered a pair of Dementors to go strolling through Niddlewinging, barked Fudge. Not if the Dementors are taking orders from someone other than the Ministry of Magic these days, said Dumbledore calmly. I have already given you my views on this matter, Cornelius. Yes, you have, said Fudge forcefully. And I have no reason to believe that your views are anything other than bilge, Dumbledore. The Dementors remain in place in Azkaban and are doing everything we ask them to. Then, said Dumbledore quietly but clearly, we must ask ourselves why somebody within the Ministry ordered a pair of Dementors into that alleyway on the 2nd of August. In complete silence that greeted these words, the witch to the right of Fudge leaned forward so that Harry saw her for the first time. She looked just like a large pale toad. No comment. She was rather squat with a broad, flabby face, as needle-neck as Uncle Vernon, and a very wide, slack mouth. Her eyes were large, round, and slightly bulging. Even the little black velvet bow perched on top of her short, curly hair put him in mind of a large fly that was about to catch on a long, sticky tongue. That's okay. Yep. And this is just the start. Wait until you get further into the chapter where she's a menace. The terror recognizes Dolores Jane Umbridge Senior Undersecretary to the Minister, said Fudge. The witch spoke in a fluttery, girlish, high-pitched voice that took Harry back. He had been expecting a croak. Okay. On that note, I hope I do Imelda Staunton justice. I'm sure I must have misunderstood you, Professor Dumbledore, she said with a simper that left her big round eyes as cold as ever. So silly of me, but it sounded for a teensy moment as if you were suggesting that the Ministry of Magic had ordered an attack on this boy. She gave a silvery laugh that made the hairs on the back of Harry's neck stand up. A few other members of the Wizarding got laughed with her. It could not have been plainer that not one of them was really amused. If it is true that the Dementors are taking orders only from the Ministry of Magic, and it is also true that 2 Dementors attacked Harry and his cousin a week ago, then it follows logically that somebody at the Ministry might have ordered the attacks, said Dumbledore politely. Of course, these particular Dementors might have been outside Ministry control. There are no Dementors outside Ministry control, snapped Fudge, who had turned brick red. Ooh, a pretty red. Dumbledore inclined his head in a little bow. Then undoubtedly the Ministry will be making a full inquiry into why 2 Dementors were so very far from Azkaban, and why they were attacked without authorization. It is not for you to decide what the Ministry of Magic does or does not do, Dumbledore, snapped Fudge, now a shade of magenta, of which Uncle Vernon would have been proud. Magenta is another pretty color. Although I consider it more of a pink than a red, honestly. Moving forth. Of course it isn't, said Dumbledore mildly. I was merely expressing my confidence that this matter will not go uninvestigated. He glanced at Madame Bones, who readjusted her monocle, and stared back at him frowningly. Stared back at him, frowning slightly. I would remind everybody that the behavior of these Dementors, if indeed they are not figments of this boy's imagination, is not the subject of this hearing, said Fudge. We are here to examine Harry Potter's offences under the decree for the reasonable restriction of underage sorcery. Of course we are, said Dumbledore, but the presence of Dementors in that alleyway is highly relevant. Clause 7 of the decree states that magic may be used before Muggles in exceptional circumstances, and as those exceptional circumstances include situations that threaten the life of the wizard or witch themselves, or which is wizard or Muggles present at the time of the... We are familiar with Clause 7, thank you very much, snarled Fudge. Of course you are, said Dumbledore courteously. Then we are in agreement that Harry's use of the Patronus charm in these circumstances falls precisely into the category of exceptional circumstances it describes. If there were Dementors, which I doubt, you have heard from an eyewitness, Dumbledore interrupted. If you still doubt her truthfulness, call her back, question her again. I am sure she would not object. Blustered Fudge, fiddling with the papers before him. I want this over with today, Dumbledore! But naturally you would not care how many times you have heard from a witness, if the alternative was a serious miscarriage of justice, said Dumbledore. Serious miscarriage, my hat, said Fudge at the top of his voice. Have you ever bothered to tot up the number of cock and bull stories this boy has come out with, Dumbledore, while trying to cover up his flagrant misuse of magic out of school. I suppose you've forgotten the hover charm he used 3 years ago. That wasn't me, it was a house elf, said Harry. You say? Roared Fudge, gesturing flamboyant in Harry's direction. A house elf! In a muggle house! I ask you! The house elf in question is currently in the employ of Hogwarts School, said Dumbledore. I can summon here in an instant to give evidence if you wish. Not. I haven't got time to listen to house elves. Anyway, that's not the only. He blew up his aunt, for God's sake. Bud shouted, banging his fist on the judge's bench and upsetting the bottle of ink. And you very kindly did not press charges on that occasion, accepting, I presume, that even the best wizards cannot always control their emotions, said Dumbledore calmly as Spud attempted to scrub the ink off his nose. Funny thing about my wand, which is hazelwooded, it's best suited for someone who can manage their emotions. And if the owner has suffered a severe disappointment, those who handle the wand will have the wand expel a discharge of energy unexpectedly. So, in other words, if I'm upset or severely devastated, don't hold my wand. Or dodge from its attacks if you're near it. Moving forward. And I haven't even started on what he gets up to at school. But as the ministry has no authority to punish Hogwarts students for misdemeanors at school, Harry's behavior there is not relevant to this inquiry, said Dumbledore politely as ever, but now with a suggestion of coolness behind his words. Oh-ho, said Bud. Not our business what he does at school, eh? You think so? The ministry does not have the power to expel Hogwarts students, Cornelius, as I reminded you on the night of the 2nd of August, said Dumbledore. Nor does it have the right to confiscate wands until charges have been successfully proven. Again, as I reminded you on the night of the 2nd of August. In your admirable haste to ensure that the law is upheld, you appear, inadvertently I am sure, to have overlooked a few laws yourself. You know, sometimes that can be said for society, especially nowadays. Laws can be changed, said Bud savagely. Of course they can, said Dumbledore, inclining his head. And why, you certainly seem to be making many changes, Cornelius. Why, in a few short weeks I was asked to leave the Wizengamot. It has already become the practice to hold a full criminal trial to deal with the simple matter of underage magic. A few of the wizards above them shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Fudge turned a slightly deeper shade of fierce. The toad-like witch on his right, however, merely gazed at Dumbledore, her face quite expressionless. There's the Umbridge or advanced Potterheads recognize. Beginner Potterheads, you're just gonna have to listen as time continues. She is well hated in the fandom, and you will learn why. As far as I am aware, however, Dumbledore continued, there is no law yet in place that says this court's job is to punish Harry for every bit of magic he has ever performed. He has been charged with a specific offense, and he has presented to his defense. All he and I can do now is to await your verdict. Dumbledore put his fingertips together again. And said no more. Fudge glared at him, evidently incensed. Harry glanced sideways at Dumbledore, seeking reassurance. He was not at all sure that Dumbledore was right in telling the Wizengamot, in effect, that it was about time they made a decision. Again, however, Dumbledore seemed oblivious to Harry's attempt to catch his eye. He continued to look up at the benches where the entire Wizengamot had fallen into urgent, whispered conversations. Harry looked at his feet. His heart, which seemed to have swollen to an unnatural size, was thumping loudly under his ribs. He had expected the hearing to last longer than this. He was not at all sure that he had made a good impression. He hadn't really said very much. He ought to have explained more fully about the Dementors, about how he had fallen over, about how he and Dudley had nearly been kissed. Twice he looked up at Fudge and opened his mouth to speak, but his swollen heart was now constricting his air passages, and both times he merely took a deep breath and looked back at his shoes. Then the whispering stopped. Harry wanted to look up at the judges, but found that it was really much, much easier to keep examining his laces.
Yeah, in circumstances like that, it's probably best to have your attention elsewhere, because I definitely would have my attention elsewhere. Because it would just be both new to me and overwhelming. So, yeah. Moving forth.
Those in favor of clearing the accused of all charges, said Madame Bone's booming voice. Harry's head jerked upward. There were hands in the air, many of them.
Well, let me add my two.
Many of them, more than half. Breathing very fast, he tried to count. But before he could finish, Madame Bones had said, and those in favor of conviction. Fudge raised his hand, and so did a half-dozen others, including the witch on his right, and the heavily mustached wizard and the frizzy-haired witch in the second row. Fudge glanced around at them all, looking as though there was something more stuck in his throat, then lowered his own hand. He took 2 deep breaths, and then said in a voice distorted by suppressed rage, very well, cleared of all charges. Excellent, said Dumbledore briskly, springing to his feet, pulling out his wand and causing the 2 chintz armchairs to vanish. Well, I must be getting along. Good day to you all. And without looking once at Harry, he swept from the dungeon.
And that is the end of this chapter. Join me next week for Chapter 9, The Woes of Mrs. Weasley. Until then, bye!